Welcome to the Psycho Studios podcast. We come to you recorded live from the desert, Phoenix, Arizona. New year, new goals. I'm Mr. Z, and co-hosting is Mr. W. We're a father-son duo that brings intelligence and creativity to our podcast and newsletter. We have a TV/film production company. We focus primarily on writing and have several ideas that we will be pitching earlier this year. We are horror freaks and use this platform to connect with our psychos. We're exploring art side of things with horror-related images and art pieces.
And topics we'll hit on: film, music, wellness, practical life skills, commentary, plus some sports headlines. Let's leave politics at the door. We're going to be fun, thought provoking, and value add. We provide our listeners a space where news and notes are real. We are honest and care about our fellow humans. Why not stop scrolling for about an hour? Take a deep breath as we will share gratitude and appreciation for the little things. Regarding the Psycho Studios podcast as well as our newsletter, The Sprinkler, each episode and chapter will be fun, engaging, and contain practical life skills to help our listeners with efficiency and money savings. We will be dropping our podcast on the first of each month along with our newsletter.
We've trimmed down our podcast and newsletter menu, and we want to have our podcast come in around 51 minutes and 50 seconds. Our newsletter will be trimmed down a little as well. We may be adding poopery to
I know, one of those funky French words, right? I probably should have just said miscellaneous, but we probably do need a miscellaneous category to kind of throw all our random thoughts in. And where should the audience check us out?
Psycho Studios hyphen studios.com.
Yeah, and it is psycho-studio.com. Quote time. You want to share that with us? You pulled this one out.
This month's quote comes from Abraham Lincoln. In the end, it's not the years in your life that count. It's the life in your years.
I love that one. Any reason why you pulled that out other than the fact that, we definitely like Abraham Lincoln?
Well, I'm really big when it comes to quotes where it should really mean something to you. I think that's what quotes really are, is resonating with people. But it's big on reflecting on your life, and I feel like he was way above his years, and you could really tell with the words that he would say, and he was such a great speechman. So I just think overall you can see that it comes across genuine and understanding about life.
Totally. Can you imagine if Abraham Lincoln had Zoom? I mean, just like you said, what a speaker. And I think that what resonates to me when you shared this quote is it's super interesting that some of the greatest men from back in the day, and we're talking 150 plus years, right? I think of Benjamin Franklin as well. You can look at their statements or quotes, and it's amazing how all of that does apply to current times. All right, so we're going to get into film, and I don't know what it was. I don't know if I had French cuisine this past week, which I don't believe I did, but I have potpourri used again, and I got to get away from that. So we've got some on this date. So we're talking January 26th, which is the date of this recording, 1974. The Exorcist wins Golden Globes for Best Film, and that was under the drama category. Best Director and Screenplay, William Friedkin. And any thoughts about The Exorcist that come to mind?
There was nothing else like it, and still to this day, we're trying to capture that lightning in a bottle.
Boy, isn't that the truth? And it's interesting because there was a lot of buzz in the 70s, and maybe it was just the changing of the times. But we had Linda Blair in The Exorcist, and she was so young, and there was so many negative stories. Back then it was the newspapers talking about how could her mother allow her to be in a movie like that. And another 70s movie, which isn't horror, but it is horrific, Taxi Driver, where we had Jodie Foster. She was so young in that movie. She's playing a child prostitute in Martin Scorsese's amazing film. And those are both from the 70s. And it's just interesting, the parallels there. And I also find it interesting as I made my way through history that William Friedkin is the one that directed and wrote the screenplay for The Exorcist, because he does another one of my favorite flicks, which isn't horror, and that's To Live and Die in LA, which just has so many layers to it, and it's interesting to me, especially when we get into a little bit short order about another one of our favorites, and thinking about how his career and how he could dabble in those different. I mean, The Exorcist and To Live and Die in LA couldn't be different, but yet he just had, like you just said, lightning in a bottle more than once. So good stuff there. Random graphic horror. So Pieces, and that is a movie from 1982. Let's chat about that a little bit. How you brought that up in the last week or so. What drew you to that movie, Pieces?
Well, I was very set on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. I mean, we're talking about the original, and it's something about it still. I don't think another movie has come across like that to me, where it actually horrified me, and it just seems so real. And as it may say in the movie or the remake, based on true things or what have you, it's not based on anything. It's nothing about it is real, but still you feel like it is. So, anyways, what drew me to that is that I've always been trying to find movies under the radar or movies that a lot of people may have never seen, and I happened to stumble upon Pieces, and you see the poster. It's with a giant chainsaw, and it talks about how you don't even need to go to Texas to have a massacre.
No, I know. And do you remember the tagline?
Yeah, it's Pieces, exactly what you think it is.
I don't know why that resonates with me so much. I don't know if there's a better tagline for a movie. And I loved how you brought that up to me. And I know you had brought it up to me before. And in the past week, we just happened to stumble across it in a different way. And we sat down and watched it, right? It wasn't planned. It was an afternoon. It comes in at about 85 minutes. And I love how, and it doesn't always have to be horror, but I love how that was a seedling, something you thought about. Like you said, you love to kind of come across those hidden gems or things that are under the radar, or maybe something, especially your generation, never saw. And I can't imagine that there was a wide audience for the movie Pieces, but just to sit down and watch that and how that brings you and I together, and it gives us something to share that maybe a lot of people haven't seen before. And it just, is it a great movie? No. I mean, if you had to score Pieces, what would you give it?
Well, just a sidebar, real quick. It came from 1982, by the way,
Right.
just to put that in context.
Same year The Thing by John Carpenter came out.
So, if I had to give it a score, I would definitely, thinking back in its time and looking past having to dub in, again, it was filmed in Spain with some American and British actors. I would give it a 7.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah, and I would too. I would give it a 7. I'm not trying to be a copycat. And you're right. I love that piece too. And how things, I mean, even though that's 82, it's the way that we see that connectivity in film. Some people might call it, ripping it off. Not in this case, but just the fact that it was shot in Spain, like you said, and only some of the actors are dubbed for the English version of it. And that ends up being a topic, at least a seedling within Once Upon a Time in Hollywood by Quentin Tarantino, where the main character, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, goes to Italy to shoot those so-called spaghetti westerns, and how he hated that shooting style because he's acting with people that aren't speaking English. And you can imagine what a challenge that would be. But yes, Pieces, we definitely want to give a shout out to that. We recommend that from a horror standpoint, and it is definitely an interesting flick. And if you're into horror, I don't know how you're not going to like it.
And I feel like a lot of movies don't know how to end. And
Yeah.
this movie knew exactly how to end. I'm not going to give away anything, but it definitely, it's not, they try to make it like a twist, I suppose,
What a
but
twist.
I think that the ending is perfect for the overall arcing of the film.
It's a great call out there, too, about the fact that, and this has come up in the last year. I don't know how many times you've brought it to my attention, and I'm like, yeah, you're right. It's like those movies linger at the end, whether it's a new movie or something in the archives. And you're right, this movie did know how to end. So great shout out there, Pieces, and shout out to Mr. Z for bringing that up and really what it brought to us this past week. Got a couple more that I would throw out there. Slaughter High. So that one, is going to be on our list of random graphic horror films from the 70s and 80s. And I sat down and watched it. I don't know how I had never seen it because it's got that classic cover art or poster art where it's like a cheerleader in the classic cheerleader outfit, but it's a skeleton for a head. So I sit down and watch that. And I'm going to step this up and so we can share some of those that we've seen. But I'm going to try to hit two a week, these graphic horror movies maybe I haven't seen or it's been a long time. And it's funny how when you watch that, and I know Easter egg might be too strong of a term, but I'm watching it, and one of the main characters, I'm like, I know that actor. Where is he from? And sure enough, you try to pick your brain and try not to use Google, and it's the main character in Slaughter High, and I guess he's probably a co-main character, but he was the love interest of Breaking Bad's Walter White's wife, if you recall that. He runs that business and he hires her, and then they have an affair. And he's so young. I mean, granted, it's 80. Slaughter High, I think maybe that was 79. And I love that type of connectivity. Like, hey, where's that actor from? Slaughter High, I would definitely give that one a thumbs up from being better than what you might expect from that type of era. And yet you still see and hear elements of Halloween and the original Friday the 13th. And then let's go into Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So Mr. Z gave me a shout out the other day about, hey, it's Toby Hooper's birthday. And of course, we're honoring him because he, rest in peace, passed away a couple of years ago. But his birthday was the 25th, or would have been.
And we made a calendar, and we, for some reason, had not put his birthday on there.
I know you can give me a black star on that one. I feel embarrassed that I didn't have Toby Hooper on there. But you brought up an interesting question about the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and you already talked about how that movie, I don't know, for lack of a better word, scared you, and I would say same here, scared me. And I was fortunate enough to have seen that on a re-release on a big screen, and that's something I want to talk to you about offline, Mr. Z, about screening those old horror classics. But really, it's so visceral, and then even from an audio standpoint, I don't know if a movie had moved me at that point just from the audio. And we talked about this. Was Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, was that really Toby Hooper's only good movie? What are your thoughts?
I think so. You look at his whole library of movies, which isn't a lot, but half a dozen. I think that that's the only one that has stood the test of time, and also, you know, still trying to make those movies to this day. I guess, you know, not The Exorcist, I was gonna say, but
Poltergeist.
Poltergeist. There's been remakes, there's been sequels, and I guess now they're even trying to remake it again. So, but overall, yeah, definitely his only great film.
Well, and people loved Poltergeist, so we could get rotten eggs thrown at us if we were around because the general public loved Poltergeist. I remember I'm old enough to remember when that movie, it was just everything was Poltergeist.
Yeah.
And I really thought there's two scenes in Poltergeist that resonated with me that, oh, that's Toby Hooper. And it's where the reporter or whatever, he was involved in the TV or the filming of that. He's looking in the bathroom medicine chest mirror and his face starts to come off. And then at the end, this isn't a spoiler alert. If you haven't seen Poltergeist, that's on you. But there's a scene at the very end in where the swimming pool would be, where the actors are in the water, filthy water, and there's just all these bodies coming up. Most of them are just skeletons. And I thought, well, that's Toby Hooper. But been watching several of his movies outside of Texas Chainsaw Massacre over the last month or so, and it's hard to believe that is the same director and writer. And I know we might just have one great movie in us, but it's hard to believe that those other films are made by the same guy.
Definitely.
And we have a list of graphic horror films, which I've talked about already. Those will be in our newsletter, paying homage to those visceral features. And we're going to give it a shout out to Christopher George. And you're like, Christopher George? I don't know how many people out there would remember him, but he's an old school actor with some horror linkage or lineage, I guess is a better word. And then upcoming horror films. So do you want to run by some of those?
Lisa's Frankenstein.
Lisa Frankenstein. Can you imagine?
And I guess with this Lisa Frankenstein movie that's coming out in February has Robin Williams' daughter.
Yep, it said Zelda.
I knew he had a son, but I know he had a daughter.
Yeah, I didn't either, and it was interesting to see that. And I don't know, I don't have a lot of hope for Lisa Frankenstein, but
The
that
commercials seem great.
and I remember seeing the trailer with you. So that is February. What else do we got on the slate?
Winnie the Pooh 2, it is as it's called right now. And who knows what's going to come out. It says February or March. So we're just going to go with March because that's the one that seems more realistic because it seems like it's still in post production. And then the first Omen, April. So there's been 9,000 of them, and I guess they're still trying to do another one.
Yeah, I mean, at least from the title, and I didn't read about it, but the first Omen. I'm assuming that means it's a prequel. When you watch the original Omen, I think there's a few things that really set that horror movie apart for its time, and I believe that came out in the mid '70s. It was produced by Richard Donner, and he was this huge producer at the time and director. And you didn't see a lot of that if you go back into the history of horror in the '70s. You didn't see a lot of those big names attaching themselves to horror. And then it was the cast. You had Gregory Peck, who is one of the most famous actors of all time. And yeah, that's old school, but he was as big as any star you can name today. He was as big as Bradley Cooper, Leonardo DiCaprio. And then you had Lee Remick playing the wife, and she was a big time actress as well. So it was really interesting that they put that all together. And I think the original Omen, even though it might not hold up from a production value standpoint in some areas, is brilliant. And really, for a trilogy, if I had to be on a desert island with a trilogy, it would probably be one of my top five trilogies because we work our way through Omen 2, where Damien, the devil's child, is in his teens and he's going to that private school. I'm going to ask you to try to pull from your memory bank. Do you remember who the leader is of that private school? Because it was a military school.
No, I can't.
Lance Hendrickson. Like, he is so brilliant in that movie. It gives me the chills. And then, of course, we have Damon Omen, The Final Conflict, and that's got one of our favorite actors, right?
Yes, Sam Neill.
Sam Neill, and he is so good in it, and it's got kind of a rawness to it. So definitely shout out to those. I don't know about the first Omen in April, and then that moves us into Oscar snubs. I've seen these flash in the headlines recently, so I'm just going to run through them real quick, and Mr. Z is going to add his. I guess we probably should say 5 cents worth. With inflation, it's no longer 2 cents worth. But we've got some snubs. So we've got Greta Gerwig, which is one of my favorite names in Hollywood, as best director for Barbie. So she was snubbed, according to the Hollywood press, along with the best actress. And I find it interesting that they still use those terms for things associated with Hollywood, the actress, when really they're all just actors. But Margot Robbie, she was snubbed for Barbie. And then there was a surprise related to Barbie, according to Hollywood, and that is Best Supporting Actor, America Ferrera, if I'm saying that correctly, from Barbie. And any comments on Barbie being snubbed like that?
I don't. Again, it made tons of money, and I obviously wasn't part of that crowd, but I've seen the movie, and I don't see what Oscar worthy Margot Robbie's like her performance was for. I mean, I know, understand that some of it was supposed to be kind of plasticky, but I mean, it wasn't. I've seen millions of other people, even background actors, act better. So, not saying she's a bad actor, just in this movie, no good.
Yeah, and it does seem like, and I don't think it used to be this way with the Oscars, but I'm not a big Oscar follower. Is the fact that it seems like maybe now, if a movie has such a huge box office, as long as it's not part of the DC or Marvel universe, then it should be nominated according to a lot of people, because if it brought in that much money, it's got to be good, and we know that's not necessarily true. And then we're also talking about another movie, May December. I believe that is a Netflix property. And it's about a tabloid romance. And Natalie Portman and Julianne Moore are in it. And if you're not familiar with the term, it's definitely an older term called a May December romance. And that is defined as a relationship between a young person and another person who is considerably older. And in this case, It's supposed to be based on true events, not something I would sniff around to say the least. But that one is also being listed as some snubs, as it were, and also a surprise because it is being listed as one of the best screenplays. So maybe give that a watch May, December on Netflix. And then we also have one more snub, at least from an actor standpoint. So that would be Leonardo DiCaprio from Killers of the Flower Moon. And then also, Hollywood is saying that the best adapted screenplay, and when you see that term adapted, it just simply means it's adapted typically from a novel, but it could also be a play, and that would be Martin Scorsese. From things that I've heard about it, the people that love Martin Scorsese, they've told me that Killers of the Flower Moon is unwatchable. And then lastly on there, you'll see that this is Lenny Kravitz. So I know we do like his, if you want to call it that, old stuff, but they're saying he was snubbed for Best Song, which is Road to Freedom from the movie Rustin, which is a civil rights movement movie. And shout out to those kind of movies, but that's really not in a genre that I would want to gravitate towards. How about the Oscars, real quick, before we come out of the snubs and surprises? There any thoughts on the Oscars? Do you pay them any mind?
I don't. Typically, it's not something I ever pay attention to, but it's good that the good actors are actually honored. But I don't think it needs to be this big ordeal. But that's how I would.
Well, yeah, I mean, they it's almost like live or die, and then you have the Golden Globes leading up to it. So, and then I don't even know who used to do it, but then you had the People's Choice Awards. So they definitely do love the awards, and that's my sentiments when I look at the Oscars over the years, especially let's just say the last decade and a half. Most of the films that get nominated and or win, they're not necessarily movies that I've even seen or would want to. But I think Oppenheimer will probably, you know, kick tail and take names this particular Oscars.
Definitely deserves it. One of a kind movie.
Yeah, agreed, agreed. And then just sharing with the audience that we signed up for IMDb Pro. So thanks to Mr. Z for signing us up. And we're going to be working on finding a manager. And that was one of those avenues that kind of came up to help us with that. And we'll most likely pitch our film ideas and script on our own. But that could be a way to go about finding representation that way. We'll use legal representation, of course, for that. And we're waiting on final word from the Library of Congress on copyright for our script, and we should hear about that thing on that. And then in the sprinkler, I will have my 2 cents worth about Reacher, the TV series that's on Amazon. I know there's been a lot of buzz about that. I thought the first season was great, but that second season almost unwatchable.
But minority because everyone seems to love it.
Well, and again, I don't know about everyone because I could pull up some critics that have echoed my sentiments, but I guess the general population that has Prime loves it. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like because I think, isn't it coming in February, the advertising piece for Amazon Prime?
I think so.
And then Fargo, the TV series, closed this past week with John Hamm and Juno Temple starring in that. And I'll definitely break that down for the audience. And next month on our podcast, Mad Men, the TV series. I don't know if I even have to preface it that way. We're going to revisit that because I know that you have been watching it along with your girlfriend, haven't you?
That I have. That I have.
All right. So moving into music. So old school on this date in 1980, Frank Sinatra played to 175,000 people in Rio de Janeiro. And I found that fascinating because I always think of Frank Sinatra and the old school, and I know 1980 is still old in the big scheme of things, but I always think of him like in black and white, and he was in the movie From Here to Eternity. So he was one of those artists that definitely became famous. He was a crooner, as they called him back in the day, and he was as big as Elvis or the Beatles before either of those were even a glimmer in anybody's eyes. And yet he had acting, he had singing, he could dance. I mean, the dude was multifaceted to say the least.
And unfortunately, not a good human being.
That's what we hear. That's what we hear, right? And there's rumblings about his association with the underworld and even indirect ties with what took place in the 60s with the Kennedys and Marilyn Monroe.
But I still love his music.
Absolutely. But it's still hard for me to wrap my brain around the fact that in 1980 he played in front of 175,000 people. Like that's, I don't know if it's a world record or was at the time, but I just was blown away by the sheer number of people that went to see him. And according to the article, those were paid admissions, so they wanted to make sure we call that out. How about Rat? Let's talk about Rat a little bit. That's come up recently for us off and on, and it's one of my favorite 80s metal bands. And Mr. Z definitely digs them as well. So, seeing them twice in concert, I would say that one time they were amazing, and that was the first time I saw them, and it was a smaller venue. The second time I saw them, they were in kind of an arena or coliseum type deal, not as big as Frank Sinatra with 175,000 people, but I would think there was probably excess of 20,000 people, and they had a shorter set and they seemed actively and disengaged, and that's going to happen with groups. You're going to sometimes see them be hot and cold. So if you do ever have any groups in mind that are always on, more power to them. But from a standpoint of their history with their albums, Mr. Z pointed out the other day about the Out of the Cellar album, and what was something that you gave feedback on that I found so interesting?
That they had definitely used curse words off their first album, and then albums following, you didn't hear them once use a cuss word, which is I thought was very peculiar. But I don't know what if that was to be more mainstream. But I don't even think thinking back like did Motley Crue really cuss? Probably not.
No, and that's interesting that you mentioned about Motley Crue because if I had to, do a memory jog right now, I don't know if they did
or
curse at
or
all.
Kiss. I listen to them a lot recently too. I just they're all of them like it's just so strange. And even now today, the newer stuff, it's not cussing, but the stuff that I listen to definitely does have cussing.
Yeah,
I
no,
don't know
and
if that
I
says
just
something about me.
well, it does say something about you, but you transported me back to that time, and it made me also think about, I use the term edgier. Maybe you might use gritty, and not even just talking about the swearing or cursing in it, but just the way it felt when you listen to that album and then you listen to the follow up album. There, it just seems cleaner. It just seems like it has less of an edge, and I could name so many groups that are that way. I think of Def Leppard too. If you listen to On Through the Night, which was their first full album, and a lot of these groups had what was called EPs. I don't Is that still a thing where it's just, 3 to 5 songs? It's extended play they called it.
Yeah, sometimes, but usually it's just they just release one single.
Oh, got it. Yeah, does seem to be the trend. And it's interesting. Obviously, they know what they were doing. Think about how big Rat got. You talk about Motley Crue, bigger than Rat, of course, and then even Def Leppard, maybe bigger than both of those groups, and they're still touring. Just they lose that edge, and I often wonder, is it the record label? I know you mentioned that the other day, or management telling them, "Hey, shut down that swearing." And on a side note, there I always bring it up, and I just feel like it'll bring me bad luck if I don't. But with Rat, one final thing about that on my end is so Milton Berle's nephew, and for most of the audience, like Milton Berle, is that a board game? And it isn't. Milton Berle was one of the first, or very first TV stars in the 50s when TV was first breaking. And one of his claim to fame back then was the fact that he played all the characters. It was like a little bit of a skit type show, and he always dressed up as a woman. Like that was his thing. And oddly enough, Milton Berle, he appeared in some of Rat's early videos. And why would there be any type of connection? It was because Milton Berle's nephew managed the group Rat. So it kind of, what comes around goes around. And as Rat would say, I'll tell you why. Any final thoughts on Rat before we move out of the cellar?
No, it in the recent years definitely become one of my favorite go-to musics or artists, I should say.
Well, an interesting thing about that too is, and we were playing some Rat before we fired up our podcast this morning, and the fact that you know the lyrics, it just blows me away. I know we're both kind of music savants that way, but to hear you, I mean, you have such a broad range of music where I know I have more of a narrow focus and it's primarily just what I would call rock and roll. But you like know that the lyrics to those songs like it's the back of your hand, and it's just it's always so impressive to me. And I'm gonna kind of wrap this up about the music part of it is so Mr. Z got me thinking about swearing on the radio and you know the entity that really frowns upon that and even fines radio stations, yes, terrestrial radio, is the FCC, right? And they it was very strict back in the day when it was limited, especially when we're talking about the 80s. There wasn't a lot of ways for people to listen to music, especially in the Midwest, other than terrestrial radio. And on Milwaukee radio, I vividly remember when Guns N' Roses' debut album came out, Welcome to the Jungle. That you're talking 1987, and they're playing those first songs from Guns N' Roses, other than Welcome to the Jungle, and they didn't edit out the cuss words. And I know it sounds like probably such a trite thing with the way we're exposed to so much today, but songs like It's So Easy and Mr. Brownstone, they were using words such as, or phrasing, fuck off, or it's so fucking easy, or that old man, he's a real motherfucker. And I'm like, wait a second, they're playing that. And it's not like I was offended by it, but I never understood why it was suddenly okay for them to play that. And not that many years after that, we transitioned out to the desert from the Midwest. And even at that time, they were playing the cuss words. But some of those so called rock stations from Milwaukee, I want to give a shout out to WQFM, WLPX, and eventually WLZR, which was laser. I believe that was at 103. And it's funny, none of those stations exist in that format anymore. I think WQFM is all talk or all news or all the above. And it's amazing how that was my only means. But we'll definitely give a shout out to Spotify because that's where it's at. Can you share with the audience? Let's transition out of the swearing in songs and why I was fascinated with that. I guess I'm an easy mark. But what's on Mr. Z's playlist right now? Give us some artists.
Well, in my rotation right now, it's been Kiss, Bush, Incubus, and Korn. And I have a few Avenged Sevenfold songs sprinkled in there, but that's that's what I was listening to at the gym today.
Excellent. And you got to throw some Oliver Tree in there, right?
I didn't listen to that today.
Okay, so we're going by today. I just think it's funny because I don't know if that was subconscious, but you start out by saying some of the playlist is Kiss, Bush, and we could go down a whole nother rabbit hole with that. But
Sure, I understand that your mind leads that way, but I sure as hell did not mean that way.
no, I know. All right, so I'm the one that's
Yeah, I was
depraved.
gonna say you can see who's mature here.
All right, it's definitely not me. I agree. On my playlist, and I didn't know it was just from today, but we'll stick with this
That's
week.
what I okay. Well, this week, sure, that
Okay.
was the same thing all week. I
Okay.
change it up weekly.
All right. He does. He's got such a varied mix, and so maybe we'll get some insight into some other things that he's listening to next month. I've got heavy doses of 80s rock, Van Halen, Def Leppard, Tesla, Scorpions, and you better believe Rat. But then I also throw in Typo Negative. I don't even know where that lands. Typo Negative, that started what in the 90s, son?
Yes, it did.
And then so-called newer rock, definitely Puddle of Mud. I still have to laugh at their latest album in more ways than one because it doesn't really capture the essence of the Puddle of Mud that you and I both like. But we still challenge everybody to listen to Butterface because I can't believe that's actually a song. And then Highly Suspect is up there for me. Sets such a great mood. STP, Bush, not to be um, copycatting, Collective Soul, and then Queens of the Stone Age. I don't care what day of the week or night of the week, um, but I'll knock out some Queens of the Stone Age. It's just what an amazing group. Great article about the lead singer, which I told myself I wasn't going to forget his name, but I did. Is there any way you remember it?
No, I'm bad about
I
that.
know we're terrible about that. And then I will say a little Incubus. You sent some Incubus my way, and that song that you sent me, and I'm sorry I don't have the title in front of me. That song really rocked.
Oh, that whole album does.
What a great group! Definitely sets a mood and a tone, and reminds me of our past. And then Sounds of Sunday. I'm really funny about that. If it's '60s rock, I'm going to listen to the Beatles, and I know that sounds cliche, but I can promise you it's not. Especially revisiting the Beatles after so many years, because that was shoved down my throat from terrestrial radio. Jimi Hendrix. This is another reason why season 2 of Reacher sucked. Is one of the main sub characters. She says Jimi Hendrix was underrated, and she says it emphatically.
Underrated
Yep,
or
underrated.
overrated?
Sorry, overrated. My bad. Thanks for correcting me. She said Jimi Hendrix is overrated, and then they basically lost me there. And you said that there's a lot of circles that feel that way about Jimi Hendrix.
Yes.
Well, they don't know their music. And then the Who, and I know it's all old technically by them, but like they're
Who?
really the really early stuff. Who's on second? Early ZZ Top, and then I don't care what song it is, but you throw it on. We were driving in downtown Tempe last week, and a Led Zeppelin song comes on, and just still, if I'm on a desert island and I can only have one group,
There's the desert island again.
it's Led Zeppelin.
I just don't even understand that. I mean, you haven't even gone on a plane before, so were you
All
able to see
right,
it?
we don't have to go down
I
that
think
rabbit
I
hole,
did.
wise guy. And like we said, Spotify is where it's at. So I was going to ask you, is there any way that we can put a link to a playlist on Spotify on our website?
No.
Okay, that shuts that down. So that's we're going to take us out of music unless you had anything else you want to say about music.
The Apple Music to Spotify debate, I just want to say it's hands down Spotify. Even though I know Apple does have better music sound, but how many people out there have good enough headphones to hear the difference? All right, next.
All right. Sounds like a rotten apple there. All right, wellness. So, a recent article in Stylist by Aidan Milan listed 8 tips for journaling, a mental health tool. And we've definitely been promoting journaling. A few months ago, our journaling suggestions were really old school, right? Get a notebook out, get some sort of ledger, or even if you want to use the old term diary, and really write those thoughts down in a handwritten style, right? But this article basically is talking about doing it that way as well. And we had mentioned about that new journaling app. I think that came out about a month ago from Apple. So, really running down the list, we've got no rules when you're doing your journaling, right? Write in a way that helps you. Um,
Even if it's, misspelled, whatever, it doesn't matter as long as you're getting your thoughts out there.
and I love that part, right? I love that part. You've mentioned that to me personally, and I appreciate that because, right, it's there are no rules. Remove expectations, right? I think when we hear journaling, especially if we're new to it or we haven't done it for a long time, we have these expectations on ourselves. I got to journal today. I've got to journal tomorrow. It's like journal in a way that's going to get you to do it consistently, whatever it is, and remove those expectations.
Right? You're writing it for yourself, no one else. So there's no reason to feel like you're going to be judged.
Right. And journaling, it could be just 2 sentences sometimes, right?
Exactly.
Be open and learn, right? We've got these, a lot of us probably do have these not only expectations, but you have these thoughts, what you hear about journaling. And I know I could say from my standpoint, my age group, especially men, it's like, I'm not going to journal. What journal? And it's amazing what a simple thing that can be, but how positively it can impact your mental wellness. Write by hand, and that was advocated in this article, and we talked about that already. But if journaling through Apple's app is going to keep you consistently doing it, then use it, right?
Totally. And write by hand, I mean, the studies of when you're at school, we're talking about on a college level because, anything below that's just a joke how they teach you. Anyways, back to that. You're writing stuff, you're going to not only learn it, but you're going to remember it because you're making that hand to mind, connection. And that's really big. And to get your thoughts out there, something that's been bothering you, whatever, you write that out. Maybe that's all you need.
Yeah, and I love that hand, did you say hand to mind connection?
Yeah.
I love that. It's not like hand to hand combat, But
It could be
for
close. You might feel that way when you're writing on a piece of paper. Who knows?
all right, I've been ruined by the movie Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think I've probably seen it. I want to say at least a baker's dozen times. Just love that movie. And there's that scene with Brad Pitt's character and Bruce Lee's character, and I just talk about hand to hand combat. Anyway, back to the journaling piece. It's whatever turns you on, right? Colors. You want to do
I
doodles.
was gonna say you could even draw.
Right. No, and I love the fact that you were already well on board with that. And it's just being backed up by these so-called experts that write these different articles about wellness. But there was mention of doing sketches, bullet points if you're really structured, whatever works for you. Maybe use a colored pencil.
And let's say that throughout the day you went to go see a movie. I know we don't get ticket stubs that often, but you have stuff you can also add that, pictures, whatever, into your journal as well.
Yeah, no, I like that part. And then what about this one? This one kind of surprised me. I didn't think about doing this, and I don't know if I will or not, but we're big on scoring movies, right? So this suggested you should score your mood every time that you're journaling. And if that suits you, it's great. But what are your thoughts on, hey, my mood today when I'm journaling on a scale of 1 to 10 is
What I've come across is a lot of people are scared of numbers. So, I mean, if numbers work for you and you like seeing how to gauge yourself in that kind of way, go for it.
I agree. I don't think I would go down that rabbit hole. I'd rather define that in words like, hey, my mood is great today or so forth. But if it floats your boat, so be it. And then gratitude, something that we promote all the time, whether it is podcast, newsletter, or just our day-to-day life. Are we perfect with it? No. But I know that I practice gratitude every day. And it's what are we grateful for, right? It's grateful for the things that we have, not the things that we want or don't have. And this is people, things. What are your thoughts on gratitude?
I think that's something definitely in today's world that is definitely lacking. So any way that you can spread that, even gratitude is just you could even tell someone that you're thinking of them. I mean, it's the simple little things that you can do to show people. I mean, it's and even writing it down what you're thankful for. I mean, it's brilliant, really, and I think that we should get more familiar with that word.
Yeah, I like that. And I might have used this term earlier today, but the journal can even be almost like a ledger, an old school term. Like doing accounting or inventory. You can inventory your thoughts that way, and what am I grateful for, and look at the positives that we have as opposed to what we don't have. And then it was interesting that this was one of their 8 tips, but you mentioned it a few minutes ago about maintaining journal privacy. So maintain your privacy. That's not something you're just going to leave out or share on social media. You could share bits and pieces of it, but you want to maintain that privacy. Any thoughts on the privacy aspect?
I truly believe there's no reason to give thoughts or to share deep, dark feelings or what have you. That is something that should just be between you and the book or
Yeah,
whatever you're writing on.
yeah, and I like that, right? That and hopefully that'll allow people or give people more of a mental freedom to know that hey, this is private, and it's kind of cool to know that you have something like that. And it's funny, I think about the references when you watch TV shows or movies from the 50s or 60s where it was the diary, and it was always, oh, that's only a girl's thing with her diary with the little lock on it, and it's you know they were onto something, they just didn't know what. And then the last thing which jumped out to me, and we talk about this all the time, and I know I need to be better about this, is being kind to ourselves and others, but definitely being kind to ourselves even in writing, right? If we had a bad day or we're talking about you know some rough patch, we've got to be better, all of us, about being kind to ourselves. Even if we made a mistake, beating ourselves up about it isn't going to help anything. We can call ourselves out, learn from it, and move on. And any last thoughts about journaling and being kind to yourself?
I think it's very practical to at least write, like you have mentioned, at least 2 sentences, something a day. It keeps your thoughts orderly. Putting your feelings out there is never a bad thing. Keeping things inside is never a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Festering comes to mind, that great word. And let's remember when we're journaling that it's both the challenges and the good stuff. right? Let's not just have it be lopsided and everybody be good to yourself. We mentioned this briefly going into the holidays, and I know you've talked about it too. Maybe even the last few years, I've heard you mention this off and on about New Year's resolutions, right? New Year, new resolutions. And a lot of things that I've seen about it is, let's ditch New Year's resolutions and lean on a to do list, daily intentions, some might call it. And, it helps us live in the moment and getting shit done as opposed to always having that albatross of, hey, I've got my New Year's resolution. I've got to make sure I hit it. And anything you want to tell the audience about New Year's resolutions one more time?
Definitely be looking at it as goals and having week goals, month goals, 6 months goal to a year goal. Because resolutions, I mean, you put in those phrases, you guide yourself, oh my God, it's New Year, I'm going to be changing all these things. You gotta be realistic. And you're putting a stigma and there's, the demographic that you look at those results of how many people actually fall through with them. I mean, basically by February, I forget the crazy number, but it was like 95% of people drop their resolutions.
It is really high. And I love the fact that you use the word stigma. So definitely we'll move out of this. Just one other thing about this wellness piece is limit your negative feelings about yourself, right? Self-doubt. Anytime we start something new and or are working in the unknown, self-doubt is inevitable. We all worry that we are not smart enough, creative enough, that we can do it a different way than the norm. The key to success is to continue through the doubt, right? We're not going to avoid the doubt. It's there, but we've got to move through it, move forward, and be present. Practical life skills. Can you give us a little bit of sentiments about that latest update about Apple's stolen device protection that some are calling life changing?
I wouldn't say it's life
I
changing,
know.
but it's just everything Apple does, it's quality of life. So something that they have been working on, I believe they even talked about it last event, but it's just, an added layer of protection to if your devices do get stolen. You've always been able to track if you have Find My Device on, which a lot of people actually don't do.
They should have that on as well, right?
Yes, but putting this on with the most recent update, it definitely is going to be beneficial for you if you live with in fear of things being stolen from you.
Yeah, good call out there. Make sure we're keeping those iOS updates appropriately. Don't avoid those. And again, make sure you activate that stolen device protection as well as Find My iPhone. Let's randomly jump into some bourbons. So, some reasonably priced bourbons that we've tried over the last few months. We're talking Four Roses, which has been one of my favorites.
And I gotta say, I definitely want to try now that I know more about alcohol, which is great. I'd probably become an alcoholic. Just kidding. But the Four Roses small, barrel,
Small batch, right?
and well, they have small barrel,
All right, small barrel, tiny barrel. Yeah.
whatever. But I thought that was like a gimmick, but I could tell you from most recent experience with
Elijah Craig.
yes, and I gotta say it's definitely way more smoother. I just starting to get into this kind of stuff, and definitely with my palate, I can tell a difference.
Nice. Yeah, no, and Evan Williams Black Label is another one that we'll give a shout out to. And most of these are going to be under $30. I think that Four Roses small barrel is probably,
It's like $40.
yeah, that's a little bit pricier. Buffalo Trace, which I find interesting, and I was going to give a shout out to that, Mr. Z. Hopefully we can try that as we move into the spring. But we mentioned Buffalo Trace in our script that one of the characters gets a bottle of that from his dad. And then we also had a shout out to Elijah Craig small batch. Other things that we've just randomly thought about as far as practical life skills. We've got used car buying, benefits, private party, what to look for and where, and what this saves, right? So had a friend reach out to me and they're considering purchasing a vehicle for their newly licensed teenager. Talk to us real quick about what are some of the savings of buying an older used private party vehicle.
Well, you talk about 2 years registration for like a 2003 vehicle, and it's even considered an SUV, and it was like $31
And that,
for
that
two
is in the
years
state of Arizona. Yep.
in the state of Arizona. Yeah, for 2 years, and the emissions test all around is for anyone doing one in Arizona, it's $17. So
And in theory, insurance would be cheaper, right?
Yes, insurance definitely would be cheaper than a brand new car.
And
That's
then
for
how
sure.
about depreciation? How much you can lose on a brand new vehicle or even a couple years old as opposed to an older one, right?
Right, exactly.
And then we're going to chat in the sprinkler about what to do with used cars once they're purchased. And we look for some real informative tips on that. I know we've got a way about that. And then lastly, in the life skill piece, groceries, using a weekly list and build to. So if you know that you typically need X amount of a certain item like eggs or milk, sticking to that list, utilize store pickup if it's available. It's not only going to save you time, but it'll save you money because when you're walking around those aisles and you don't have a list, you're just throwing stuff in that cart that maybe you're not going to use, maybe that's going to spoil. So use those lists, have a build to if you have a nice pantry, and then utilize that store pickup. As far as commentary goes, we'll cut through some of this fairly quickly, but it is today the anniversary of the horrific helicopter crash that took Kobe Bryant, his 13-year-old daughter, and seven other people. And one of the greatest basketball players ever. And from things that you hear, there's a lot of mixed messaging about Kobe Bryant's history, but definitely towards the last couple of years of his life, he was out there helping those that needed the helping hand and was listed as a really great father. So definitely rest in peace to Kobe Bryant. Idaho murders. You had mentioned this to me recently. So we've got Kohlberger, right? Him and his attorneys want to charge. They want the charges dismissed for a third time, all based on legal mumbo jumbo. And any thoughts about that? I know you had shared some with me this past week.
It's just crazy to think that they demolished the house that, the murders did take place, and the school was not being cooperative. They were the ones that were passed on to the house, and the fact that they keep on delaying this case is just it's actually insane. And I can only imagine for those families that had lost their loved ones, like what they could possibly be going through, that this is the outcome.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. We've complained about the justice system for years and years and years, and this is just seems like it's almost getting worse when it comes to this. And that was the University of Idaho that demolished that house before the trial is even done, right, against the parents' wishes, etc. So definitely not the best of stories there, but the country and world, they're experiencing unprecedented challenges. Mr. Z does a great job of living in the moment. I'm trying to get better at that, and he reminds me often. When we are out and about, let's be kind and friendly to one another. We all have our struggles and our own stories. Be cool to each other, as Mr. Z is quoted. I love that quote. It's something we try to live by. We try. We're going to challenge everyone to be mindful of how much news they consume and time spent on social media. We are all about our psychos. Please be safe. We've got some sports headlines. So, real quick, sports headlines. Packers eliminated from the run to the Super Bowl, losing to the Niners 24-21 in that divisional round. Zach Tom was a key injury on the offensive line with Josh Nijman subbed in. He played okay, but I think that definitely made Jordan Love hurry it up those last three drives. Packers are replacing Joe Barry as defensive coordinator. Defense came on strong at the end of the season and finished in the top 10 in points allowed. So that's one of the few times that they've finished that high since their last Super Bowl win. And was that the right move to get rid of defensive coordinator Joe Barry? Mr. Z?
I don't think so. I think he saw great improvement, and it was crunch time, and they knew even the players knew what they needed to do. But I could probably see next season would have been that much better.
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen him keep that continuity. And, you look at the numbers and keeping the other team from scoring, I think is really the number one job of the defense, right? And I say it still stings that they lost because they should have won that game and they should be playing in the championship game this weekend, but that's not happening. Any final thoughts on watching them lose last week?
I just think that hopefully we find a better kicker,
Oh boy,
because
yeah.
across the league you see that that's actually a huge problem.
Ugh. I got to move on from that. Great call out there. NBA Bucks fire first year head coach Adrian Griffin. Definitely a shock to some. Doc Rivers is going to replace him. From an earlier podcast, and this was a few months ago, I had listed that, a story about Milwaukee Bucks. They look poised to start another championship season, and they had added Damian Lillard, also known as the Dame, and the season looked bright. And the Bucks kicked off their regular season back in October, and the new coach actually dismissed an assistant and former head coach that they had brought in to help him kind of come along, Terry Stotts. And he supposedly called that Terry Stotts out in a practice in front of everybody, and that assistant coach resigned immediately. And it's interesting how I really thought that that was a red flag. And here we go, Adrian Griffin, no longer the coach. About 38 games to go in the regular season. We'll see what happens there. The buzz is that Griffin lost the locker room, but according to Giannis, he had statements that were to the contrary. Was it the right move to get rid of that Bucks coach so early, Mr. Z?
I have no say.
Okay, he's going to leave the Bucks to me. Also, our way too early Super Bowl picks were just that. Here's where we landed at the start of the season. Mr. Z, you want to cover that?
So I was Eagles versus Bengals with Eagles winning, and you were Eagles versus Dolphins and Dolphins winning.
Yikes, boy, did we flamed out there.
Hey, can't have the foresight.
We are going into the championship weekend, so let's pick them. So we've got Chiefs at Ravens. Who are you taking in that contest?
Chiefs, 100%.
And I'm going Ravens, 99%.
Yes.
How about Lions at 49ers?
Yeah, so I'm going to have to say the Lions have been on fire, and they're proving themselves. I got to say, for the first time in, what, ever?
30 years.
So, that's ever. And the Lions, I'm going to pick over the 49ers.
Well, and even though I despise both teams, I'm just going with the safe picks, 49ers. And we'll have a little bit of story next year. Sorry, next year. It's already next year. Next month, where Aaron Rodgers called out the fact that the logo for the new Super Bowl, the upcoming Super Bowl in February, had the colors for the Ravens and the 49ers. So his claim is that it was scripted, and those teams were going to be going to the Super Bowl based on some script that the NFL uses. So we've got you picking the Chiefs and Lions. So who wins in the Super Bowl between those two?
The Chiefs.
All right. And Ravens, 49ers, I'm going Ravens. So we couldn't be on the opposite side of the fence more. Let's run through a couple more things real quick. I know I'm getting that end of the podcast thing, and I thought we were going to do better with a smaller menu, but once again, I'm over talking. But the interesting individual of the month, real person or fictional, and I picked Christian Bale's character in American Psycho, Patrick Bateman. This character is for sure an iconic one. Many horror lists have American Psycho listed. We feel this was a drama, not horror. The character of Bateman is one of those roles where you know the actor is going to become a big star. We know how big of a star Bale has become. You think about that movie and that character specifically, the music that he listened to, the diet he had, the exercise, the way he took care of his body. The inner dialogue piece I loved, where he's basically narrating to the audience, but also to himself. Do you remember when he got upset about how they weren't going to have a good seat in the restaurant?
Oh, yeah.
How about the business card scene? Is that one of your favorite scenes in that type of movie?
Most definitely.
Oh my God, was it Patton's card better than mine? And how about the odd conversations with his fiance? It's like he wasn't even acting like he had a fiance.
100%.
Reese Witherspoon. That's one of my few movies that I liked her in. And then how about his interactions with the detective, Willem Dafoe?
Oh, yeah. Those are the most memorable to me.
Willem Dafoe just knocks it out of the park in that movie. I love Willem Dafoe. I know we both do.
If you break it down a lot, you could really see that's, the whole movie is a big twist, and you don't really know what's going on. But I think if you, break down the movie on a psychology level, I don't think William Dafoe is actually even there.
Wow, and I'd like to explore that more with you. I know I'm getting the end of the podcast sign, but I definitely want to pick your brain about that more, so look for more of that, because I still am confused about what to think about that movie as much as I loved it. And yes, Patrick Bateman is a bad man, or is he? But I just think he's interesting. We're not saying good or bad. And then, of course, he spirals into the loss of sanity, the sex, drugs, and violence. And I love the fact that it was ultimately directed by a woman, which was unusual at the time that movie came off. So we're going to sign off. I know I'm getting that evil stare. And do you want to?
That's none of the things that I'm doing.
Do you want to read that quote that I pulled from one of our favorites?
No gains without pains. That was from The Rock. Just kidding.
Stop it.
Benjamin Franklin said that in 1745.
1745, which kind of ties together. No, it wasn't The Rock. Ugh.
It sounds like something he would
Oh,
say.
stop it. No, it does. What was that? Is that movie with him and Mark Wahlberg?
Yes, it is.
Is
That's
it Pain and Gain or?
there's no it's no pain without gain
Oh my goodness. So
or
they might have
something.
ripped off Benjamin Franklin, but that's kind of leading to the beginning where Mr. Z had pulled that Abraham Lincoln quote and the fact that, right, there's no gains without pains. Yeah, it might be worded a little bit wonky, but that was 1745. So we definitely give a shout out to some of those founding fathers and their foresight into how their words can apply in 2024. Thanks for listening to episode 6 of Psycho Studios podcast. And we're going to end each one of these with a takeaway. So, Mr. Z, give us a quick takeaway from today's podcast.
I think that gratitude really stuck out to me, and I just really hope that someone important in your life, even if you don't have a someone you can say that they're important to you, or you have a dog or an animal, just make sure that they know that.
Yeah, I like the way that you included the pet piece. And, that's not to reference the fact that cats supposedly can cause schizophrenia. But I love that part about gratitude. And for me, it's about how film can bring people together. And there is so much more to a movie than just a movie. And I know a lot of us that do watch movies, you get those feelings, but it can bring us together. It gives us connectivity when it comes to that and nostalgia. So definitely a shout out for movies in general. We'd love to hear feedback from our audience. Comments, suggestions are welcome. Email us at psychostudios66@gmail.com. Again, that's psychostudios66@gmail.com. You can reach us at our website, psycho-studio.com. And again, that's psycho-studio.com. And reminder, our podcast newsletter and more can be accessed through the website. We make announcements on Instagram and X when we drop new content. And do you want to give that final shout out there?
Be safe and stay psycho.
Nice.